Great. Marcus, do we get a countdown or anything? No. Okay. Yeah, don't do that. Good evening. Welcome to Haney's Community Space, and thank you for joining us for this Candidates Forum. My name is Paul Petroquin. I'm the Director of Advancement for Project Open Hand, and I will be acting as moderator for our forum here this evening. For everyone here in person and joining virtually, welcome. This Candidates Forum will feature the two candidates for the California State Assembly District 17, in which we are now sitting. As you will hear from the Department of Elections, we're here tonight to learn about both of their perspectives as it relates to the food landscape in San Francisco. Project Open Hand will be joined by four partner organizations: Meals on Wheels, San Francisco, Curry Senior Center, San Francisco New Deal, and Visitacion Valley Community Unity. Our questions will focus on food security, scarcity, and issues as they relate to the missions of our organizations. Neither Project Open Hand nor any of our partners are here to endorse either candidate, and here are only to use this space to help voters make an informed decision. In a moment, I will introduce the two candidates, as well as our own CEO and a representative from the Department of Elections. But first, I want to give an overview for the run of show, format, and rules that we will be following. This forum will begin with a series of questions from Project Open Hand, followed by questions from our partners, beginning with Meals on Wheels San Francisco, then Curry Senior Center, followed by SF New Deal, and concluding with Visitacion Valley Community Unity. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. I will be keeping time and advise the candidates when they have 1 minute, 30 seconds, and 10 seconds remaining, after which I will advise them that their time has concluded. As this is a forum and not a debate, I will encourage the candidates to keep their focus on their own answers and not those of the other candidate. After the questions have concluded, the candidates will both give closing remarks, after which the forum will adjourn. Once again, I want to give my profound thanks to Haney's for use of this wonderful community space, to our partners for co-sponsoring this forum, to 4 Point Beer Company for providing refreshments, to the candidates for their openness to participating, and to everyone joining us here in person and virtually for demonstrating the level of civic engagement we have come to expect from San Francisco residents. Before we meet the candidates, I'd like to give some space to Paul Hepfer, CEO of Project Open Hand.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Hepfer, CEO of Project Open Hand, and it's really an honor to have you all here with us in person. I'm so glad to be in person for anything these days, and those of you that are joining us virtually, too, for this Candidates Forum on the eve of election for the California Assembly District 17. We are grateful to be hosted here at Haney's Community Space and joined by the two candidates, Matt Haney and David Campos. I also want to thank our co-sponsored organizations for helping to make this happen: Meals on Wheels San Francisco, Curry Senior Center, San Francisco New Deal, and Visitacion Valley Community Unity, and our partner, 4 Point Beer Company, for providing some of the refreshments we'll be enjoying this evening. We're here tonight to hear from candidates about the food landscape and food and nutrition issues facing San Francisco. I've asked co-sponsored organizations to submit questions so we can all learn more about the candidates and their plans for the city, as well as their thoughts on some of the things these past few years have revealed about these already existing challenges. I need to emphasize, as Paul did, that this is for voter education, and neither Project Open Hand nor any of our partners here this evening are endorsing either candidate. Our objective here is only to inform and allow voters to make educated decisions. With that said, thanks all again for coming, and we're excited to get started.
Thank you, Project Open Hand, for having us and for hosting this candidates forum. My name is Tiff, and I manage the Department of Elections Outreach Division. So we have set up a table outside to provide nonpartisan voting information with you. As a reminder, tomorrow is Election Day, so April 19. Voters who live in State Assembly District 17 are eligible to participate in this election. So if you have not already returned your ballot, or if you haven't registered to vote, you can still register to vote in person. We encourage you to register to vote at the City Hall Voting Center or at your polling place, which is open tomorrow from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So for this election, we do have 183 polling places across the city. You may also drop off your ballot if you haven't already done so at the 34 ballot drop-offs in the neighborhood, City Hall Voting Center or polling place. We're also currently still recruiting for workers, not for this election, but for the future election. So we do highly encourage you, to apply as a poll worker and to help facilitate this election. If you know any outreach activities for us to be there, similar to these candidate forums, our team would love to be there and, love to share nonpartisan voting information with everybody in the city and in the community. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. And without further ado, let's meet the candidates. Matt Haney is a San Francisco supervisor, San Francisco Board of Education president, nonprofit founder, advocate, organizer, and pro bono tenant attorney, as well as state legislative aide. Matt currently represents downtown San Francisco on the Board of Supervisors and serves as chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, leading the development and oversight of the city and county's $13+ billion budget. Prior to his election to the Board of Supervisors, Matt was elected twice to the San Francisco Board of Education. Matt attended Bay Area Public Schools and holds a BA from UC Berkeley, JD from Stanford University, and LLM in Human Rights from National University of Ireland. David Campos currently serves as the Vice President of the California Democratic Primary. He learned English while working with his parents to put food on the table and earned scholarships to attend Stanford and Harvard Law. Since graduating, David has worked in public service as San Francisco Deputy City Attorney, Police Commissioner, District 9 Supervisor, Santa Clara Deputy County Executive, and is currently Chief of Staff to District Attorney Chesa Boudin. David is running his campaign 100% corporate-free and to end childhood hunger and reduce poverty in California. With that said, Mr. Haney, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for hosting this on the eve of the election, which is really actually a very nice respite from the hectic pace of campaigning and having the opportunity to really have a deeper conversation with all of you about such a critical, important issue. I want to thank all of the hosting organizations, Manny's, Project Open Hand, Meals on Wheels, SF New Deal, Visitacion Valley Community Unity, and Curry Senior Center. Did I get okay? So thank you so much for hosting us, and thank you for the incredible work that you all do. I'm familiar with many of these organizations, and when I was looking at the questions that, as we were preparing for this debate, my initial response to most of them was, just give you all more support so you can keep on doing what you're doing. And we have really acknowledged and understood how critical of a lifeline you all provide every day, particularly I know for the supervisor district that I represent, and through the pandemic, having you all there, making sure as food insecurity worsened, as people's ability to access those critical services, their ability to go outside even was limited, you were there for them, and you kept a lot of people alive and you kept them well. So I want to thank you for that, first of all. We have huge challenges in our state, and a lot of them are connected to poverty and inequality. California has the highest rate of poverty in the country. I think that's not something that we acknowledge enough or recognize enough. And many of the challenges and problems that we have, whether it's access to health care, access to good jobs, access to food, access to housing, homelessness, are connected to poverty and inequality. And so I know that's a conversation that we're going to get deeper into today. It's one that in my work as a supervisor representing District 6, as chair of the Budget Committee, I've worked on, and I'm excited to take our work and your work to represent San Francisco in the State Assembly and work on these issues. Thanks again for having us tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Haney. Mr. Campos, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and again, thank you to Manny's, to Project Open Hand, and to all the organizations that have brought us here today. Let me say this, that this topic of food insecurity is a personal one for me. I think some of you have heard my story, my own personal story. My parents, my family and I, we came here undocumented when I was 14 with my 2 little sisters and my parents. And so food insecurity is something that we have actually gone through. I know what it's like to be hungry, and I know what it's like to actually see your parents skip meals so that their kids can eat. And the sad reality is that even though we live in the wealthiest state in the country and among the wealthiest countries, if we were a separate country in the world, we have millions of Californians that go hungry every day, every night. And the irony is that, California actually grows half of the vegetables and fruits in the entire country. And here you have millions of Californians having no access to it. The reason I'm running is because I think that there is a reason why that's happening in the wealthiest state in the country. The reality is that to change the system that we have, we need to change how we elect officials. The reason why we still have hunger in California is because we have elected a supermajority of Democrats in the state legislature who have promised to end hunger in California. And the reason that hasn't happened is because of how they are elected. I am running a corporate-free campaign, 100%, because I believe that to actually have California finally address issues like hunger, you have to elect individuals who are not beholden to the corporate interests that run the show in Sacramento. We have a budget surplus of $40+ billion, enough to end hunger if we actually decided to do so in California.
Thank you both. We would like to turn now to the organizations and the questions that have been submitted by our participants, beginning with Project Open Hand, and welcoming back to the microphone our Chief Executive Officer, Paul Hepburn.
Thank you. All right. Question number 1. According to the San Francisco Food Security Task Force, even prior to COVID-19 pandemic, at least 1 in 4 San Franciscos were at risk for food insecurity and its negative impacts, including poor health, elevated stress, exacerbation of mental health and other chronic health conditions, and impairment to child development and academic achievement. And older adults with HIV and other chronic health issues are at even greater risk of experiencing nutrition insecurity. What does your administration plan to do to alleviate these conditions?
Mr. Haney, we begin with you.
Well, this is an issue that we've dealt with a lot in the district that I represent currently, and where many of the organizations are located in the Tenderloin in particular. And there are a number of things that I think that we need to do more of and can be models for the state. One is that we still have far too many communities where there isn't access to healthy food in those neighborhoods. The Tenderloin is one of those communities where we do not have large grocery stores, we don't have affordable healthy foods. And so incentivizing and providing support, whether those are tax incentives or subsidies or otherwise, for corner stores, like we've done in the Tenderloin with the Healthy Corner Store Corner Store Initiative, it can be a huge part of the solution. Actually helping folks offer and provide for fresh food and being able to do that in a way that's sustainable for small businesses is a huge part of this. The other thing is that we have to make sure that the benefits that people provide are actually accessible, that they are enrolled quicker and easier, and that they can actually use them. There are still far too many places that don't accept CalFresh. We have people who are eligible who are not being enrolled, and we have to expand those benefits. So we have to make sure that food is available where people are so that they can actually access it, and then that they have the resources to be able to do so. So those are things that I think at the state level, simplifying the enrollment process, expanding the enrollment process, ensuring that people can use the benefits that they have, and then also making sure that our small businesses, our grocery stores are open and accessible in neighborhoods that right now in places like the Tenderloin, where for far too often they're not. What we have seen is when we incentivize small businesses like our corner stores to open those, to offer that fresh and healthy food, that people access it, they buy it, and that it can be sustainable if they're given, in some cases, grants or loans or other incentives to put those, to get that food out on their shelves.
Thank you, Mr. Haney. Mr. Campos, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I have dealt with that issue as a supervisor on a number of levels, and one of the challenges that I had when I represented the mission and the Portal Up was actually finding supermarkets that would be willing to go into these neighborhoods and open. And quite frankly, I think it's really challenging that oftentimes you're left as a supervisor, you know, to kind of do your own advocacy, when I think the city could actually play a bigger role in pushing these big companies to go into every neighborhood in a very equitable way. And, you know, what I ended up doing was, you know, we finally got a grocery outlet to come into the mission. But the deal that we agreed to was that you can come into the mission, but you have to come into the portal as well. And quite frankly, I think this is a question of political will. Why is it that San Francisco, with all of the money that it has had, and we had, for instance, a budget surplus, you know, we had hundreds of millions more during the pandemic. Why didn't we set aside, you know, $100 million, $200 million to actually end food insecurity in San Francisco? We could do that. In California, you know, we could just have a fraction of the surplus, a few $1 billion, and that could possibly end hunger in California. You know, it is a complicated issue, but it's not rocket science. It takes money and resources to make it happen. And quite frankly, that's where I think the assembly person for this district has to be a person who pushes the envelope on this issue. This is arguably the most progressive assembly district in the entire state. I'm going to be pushing the envelope to make sure that we don't talk about ending hunger, but we actually end hunger in California. We have the money to do it. The question is, do we have the political will to make it happen?
Thank you. Open hand, please.
Okay. Second question. Food programs are facing high demand and changing service environments in the midst of unstable funding. Recommendations to help alleviate these conditions include maintain and expand city investments in food through health equity framework, ensuring high quality and culturally sensitive food is available. What are your thoughts on how economic distress and structural racism has exacerbated food and nutrition insecurity in San Francisco?
Mr. Campos.
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is that everything that we're talking about when it comes to food insecurity has to do with the inequality in society, right? And that's why my campaign is about nothing more than ending that inequality and addressing the systemic inequities that have plagued society. And that means changing a number of things. And I think it begins with healthcare. I think that you have to provide equitable access to healthcare to these communities because that has implications on food insecurity as well. I think it means, you know, getting rich people and especially corporations to pay their fair share. And so it is about doing governing in Sacramento in a different way. And quite frankly, the reason why I think my campaign is being targeted, you know, more than $1.5 million being spent against me and on behalf of my opponent is because the corporate players that have been running the show are terrified that someone like me is going to get elected. They know that I'm going to make sure that corporations pay their fair share and that we actually fund programs that are designed to address not just poverty and hunger, but all of the inequities that stem from a society that has historically left out so many people, especially people of color. And quite frankly, those inequities have been exacerbated by the pandemic. COVID-19 did not create inequality in the state, but it certainly exacerbated, and people died disproportionately because of that inequality. That's what this campaign is about.
Thank you. Mr. Haney, yes, please.
Well, I think right now everything about our food systems are deeply unequal, particularly when it comes to systemic racism. That goes from who is growing the food, who is profiting off of it, how much workers are paid, who is providing the food in the communities, where food is accessible and where it's not, and who has access to it. And so I think if you're looking at systemic racism and racial inequalities, you have to look at solutions that address a larger holistic framework for all of those issues. One of the things that we're doing, and Jafria is here, and we put this in the budget and have been working on this with Supervisor Safai, is food empowerment markets, where you're actually providing food for a neighborhood, but in so doing you're investing in entrepreneurship, you're investing in job creation and small businesses. I think we need a model like that in some of the food deserts in our city and across the state, where we are ensuring that people are not only having access to food, but that they're able to grow it, they're able to create it, they're able to sell it. And that's how you create a more holistic solutions to hunger. We saw this in many ways during the pandemic with the Latino Task Force and the Mission Food Hub. What happened there was not only were we providing food, we were actually providing other educational opportunities, small business opportunities. We were putting people to work there. These are things that I think require holistic solutions, and when we attack the racism that is ingrained in how people access food, it has to be throughout the entire system. It's not just providing it, it's actually lifting people up and looking at a regional food hub model. Who's growing the food? Getting the big factory farms out of how food is provided, and actually when we invest in providing food to those who need it, we lift people up and provide them with those entrepreneurial opportunities.
Thank you. Okay, my last question. The cost of food insecurity is measured through its contributions to poor health and health disparities through multiple pathways: stress, trauma, poor diet quality, and malnutrition. Food insecurity increases risk of multiple chronic conditions, including diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension, and it exacerbates existing physical and mental health conditions. It impairs child development and limits academic achievement. Food insecurity and hunger impacts our community in many different direct and indirect ways. And the social and economic costs are passed on in many ways, including higher healthcare costs. How do you think we can address this health crisis in a long-term and sustainable way?
Mr. Haney, please, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think it's important that we expand our understanding of the role that food plays in our communities. There is not health care that provides for everyone's needs if we don't have access to quality food. Our schools cannot provide quality education unless all of our young people are able to ensure that they do not go hungry. So at every level, we have to integrate into our institutions a role for access to high-quality, healthy food in the schools. One of the things that we did and I worked on extensively while I was on the Board of Education is to make sure that every young person who comes into our school doors has access to breakfast. Free breakfast for every student in California is critical, and that we have to even go a step further in this. SFUSD started to do this, and a lot of other districts are beginning to do it as well. Every family who needs access to food should be able to access it at school. They should actually have take-home dinner kits that they can access at school that they can bring home. So from using each of our institutions, whether it's our schools or our hospitals, our healthcare system, as entry points to ensure that people have access to food and that we're addressing and confronting hunger. So it's taking away this, I think, separation that often exists from an issue like food access and actually integrating it into every single one of our institutions. Medi-Cal, our healthcare systems, are ensuring that we have universal healthcare access and then integrating food access into that. When you sign up for healthcare, you should also be getting adequate access to food benefits every single time. I think for me, as we're looking at education policy, higher education policy, right, you have young people who are showing up at our colleges, our universities, without access to food, ensuring that we are integrating into each of those institutions access to food, because we can't be successful there if we're not also addressing this issue.
Well, I think that funding a lot of these programs and increasing that funding is important, but quite frankly, I think that we need to be more ambitious. One of the things that I intend to do as a legislator is to introduce a bill that specifically calls for ending hunger in California, and that specifically calls for the state investing whatever that money is, the billions of dollars that it will take, and I think that we should set a goal, and I think that we can do that. That if we can say as a state we're going to end hunger in California in the next 5 years, that we have the money to do it. But ending hunger is not enough. You actually have to address other systemic issues, and I'll begin with healthcare. Because even if people have food, if you do not have equitable access to healthcare, people will once again go hungry, because so much money is being spent to actually cover healthcare costs, which is why, to me, the top priority coming out of a pandemic has to be to finally pass Medicare for all. That's going to be my top legislative goal, and I believe that it's time that we do that. And I'll be honest with you, there are many reasons why we don't have it, and one of them has to do with money once again. People run promising Medicare for all, and when they're elected, because of how they got elected with money from people who are against it, they don't support it. That's why in this race, the opponents of Medicare for all have spent more than $140,000 against me to make sure that I'm not elected. So you want to end food insecurity, you have to finally have universal health care in California. The two are connected. And that's why it's important to talk about not just one issue, but understand that the entire system has to be changed. How we empower people over the corporate and moneyed interests in Sacramento is key to addressing these issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to Project Open Hand. At this time, I'd like to welcome representatives from Meals on Wheels San Francisco to the microphone.
Hello, good evening. I'm Jim Oswald, Meals on Wheels. During the pandemic, Meals on Wheels San Francisco has seen a 25% increase in older San Franciscans age 60 plus in need of meals and services. Just last year, we prepared and delivered just a little over 2.3 million meals to more than 18,000 San Franciscans in 1 year, 13,000 of which were people impacted by COVID, adults under the age of 60 as well as children, and about another 5,300 homebound older adults age 60 and older, many who live alone, many who live on less than the federal poverty level 1, or it's about $40 a day. Food is ultimately a human right, particularly in San Francisco with its access to resources. During the pandemic, emergency funding just barely covered the need. Now, as emergency funding for services ends, the vulnerable communities that we all serve here in this room, including older adults, are at risk of becoming food insecure again. How do you plan to keep pace with the funding for services and the resources needed to support and grow senior nutrition programs here in the city?
Mr. Campos, we'll start with you. 2 minutes.
Great, thank you.
Once again, I believe that we need bold ideas, and we need to set a goal to end hunger in California, and that includes seniors. And let me say that I have spoken to many seniors in the last few weeks who talk about the challenge of surviving in a place like San Francisco, right?
And even though funding has been increased, the increase only meets the very minimum of what is actually needed and required. I think that we need to do a better job. And those seniors are disproportionately, by the way, people of color, members of the LGBTQ community. Many of them are immigrants. And I think that we owe it to them. They have contributed to society to make sure that they have, food on a daily basis. That's not happening. But I think that it goes beyond, food. There are other challenges that they face. I talked about healthcare. I talked about housing. Again, if we're going to address the needs of these communities, we have to address the totality of the individual. We need to make sure that we provide housing that's affordable for them. And this is one of the points that I make as people are pushing for more luxury housing being built in San Francisco. We need to have housing that's actually affordable for them, for families, for seniors that are struggling. As a supervisor, I did a study to look at what was happening to LGBTQ seniors in San Francisco, and many of them were leaving the city because they could no longer afford to live here. People that survived the AIDS epidemic can no longer stay in San Francisco because of the city not addressing their needs, including something as basic as food. I think California needs to do a better job of addressing the needs of seniors across the board. I would propose a study that actually looks at the needs, beginning with food insecurity, but I think that there are other issues that are impacting them that are getting in the way of them having the healthy life that they're entitled to given what they have contributed to society.
Thank you. Mr. Haney, you have 2 minutes.
Well, the first thing is that we can't cut those programs back to where they were before the emergency funding came in. The reality is, as we're talking about here tonight, we were in an emergency and a crisis level before the pandemic. So the idea that we would go back to where we were, which was grossly inadequate in terms of the benefits and the access that people had, is completely unacceptable. So I would fight to maintain and expand those investments, both in the work that you all are doing and also in the assistance levels that are provided to people who are struggling to get by in our city. We also need to acknowledge that in a place like San Francisco, it's much more expensive. Everything is more expensive. And so the benefits that people receive here are often inadequate for them to provide for, even less adequate than they are for people in other places. Everything here is more expensive. And so ensuring that we are increasing those benefits and recognizing the cost of living here is critical, and building in regular and substantial increases to those funding levels, both for organizations and individuals, is something that is critical. We also have to make sure that when people are eligible, that they have access, that we're reaching them, that they're enrolling. There are still challenges with making sure everyone who should have access to these benefits and programs has access, and that we're enrolling them effectively. And so as a state, as I said, every single touch point that we have with an individual has to be an opportunity to get them enrolled and get them access. These are things that I think that we know we can learn from some of the things that you all were doing to reach more people and reach them effectively during the pandemic, but let's grow on that. Let's not roll that back. Let's build from that. Let's sit down at the table with all of the folks here and say, what worked and how do we do more of that, not less of it?
Thank you.
My second question, where do you see food insecurity for the growing older population, age 60 and older, ranked among the city's top priorities and initiatives?
Mr. Haney, if you would begin. 2 minutes.
Sure. I guess I kind of addressed it a little bit in the last question. This was a huge priority, certainly, throughout the pandemic, and we made a lot of investments as a city. I think it was very high on the concerns as we were thinking about how to protect people. I represent, a district currently that includes not only the Tenderloin, but also Treasure Island. And we set up a food distribution site out there to reach many of the folks on the island who were having challenges. If you can imagine, there aren't many restaurants or grocery stores out on the island, and so it was even more challenging to make sure that we reached them. And there are many seniors there as well. So I think that as we think about all of the things I talked about in the last question, enrolling folks, a lot of seniors are not enrolled in programs that they should be involved in, accessing where they are. I also think that we need to make sure that within housing
that seniors are living in, that there are effective and adequate food programs. This is something that I've done in working with some of the supportive housing providers in my district, TNDC, THC, to make sure that we are having food pantries, food banks in the lobbies, in actually where they live, because for many seniors, as Meals on Wheels demonstrates it better than anyone, we have to reach people where they are and making sure that we're providing for that, not only in their neighborhoods, but actually in their buildings, at their doorstep, and funding the programs that can do that. I know we're going to get into this a bit later as well, but I do think a part of this is making sure that our seniors have adequate resources to survive, and that means guaranteed income. That means much more robust levels of benefits. People who are living on disability, and those benefits have to be expanded so that they can provide for these issues of access as well.
You may not want to hear this, but I don't believe that food insecurity for seniors or food insecurity, period, is the priority that it should be for the city. One of the reasons I'm running is because I think that San Francisco is so focused on the wrong thing. It is a tale of two cities. It is on one hand the wealthiest city in the world, in the country, among the wealthiest in the world, and yet it's leaving behind so many people who are not accessing, that prosperity, and seniors are among them. And quite frankly, if food insecurity and addressing food insecurity had been the priority that it should have been, you wouldn't be talking about worrying about what the budget's going to do to the programs that the city is funding. I've spoken to Supervisor Ronan, who's now the chair of budget, and I know that she is committed to actually doing something so that you don't have to fight for money every single year of the budget. But that's the challenge with San Francisco. This is a city that is working for a lot of wealthy people. 1 out of every 11,000 San Franciscans is a billionaire. And yet the city is not thinking about the rest of us. Treasure Island, the supervisor mentioned Treasure Island, a place that is struggling, and yet the city is actually talking about imposing a toll on Treasure Island to go in and out of the island. That's the whole point of what we're saying in this campaign, that we as a city, the wealthiest city in the country, have to do better, that we as a state, the wealthiest state in the country, have to do better, that California is not defined, its success is not defined by how the wealthiest are doing, but how those that have the least. And by that measure, our seniors and kids that are going hungry every day, the millions of them, we are not doing right by them. And that's why I'm running, because I think we need someone to make that a priority once and for all.
I'm going to turn over to Ashley McCumber, CEO of San Francisco.
And we'd like to share. Hi. First of all, I just want to say thank you for your service, both of you, and all that you've done. I'm going to pull us out of food security a little bit and just ask a very specific question. I've had the great pleasure to be the chair of Meals on Wheels America, the chair of Meals on Wheels California, and so that's put me in the halls of Congress, Sacramento, and also in City Hall. So there's never a chance where I would go in to meet with either one of you where you say, no, we don't want to help seniors, no, we don't want to do food security. But there are very few people leading on aging and disability in their priorities. In fact, I went to your website this weekend. I did not find the word aging or disability or aging in the city anywhere there. That doesn't mean that housing and health care and all those things aren't senior issues, but we need more people to kick us in the platform. And so my question to you is there something that you have chosen to lead on for seniors that you can point to that you're proud of? And two, if given the seat in Sacramento, what would you do to be a leader there for aging and disability?
Mr. Campos, will you review for 2 minutes?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question, and thank you for pointing that out. Look, as a supervisor, not only did I fight to provide more funding to senior, food programs, but I actually worked to make sure that we address issues around housing for seniors, and not just LGBTQ seniors, but other seniors from different backgrounds. I also, worked to make sure that we had
access to healthcare. Even, this is before Obamacare. I'm the person who worked to make universal healthcare truly universal in San Francisco. And what I'm going to say about my priorities if I'm elected to the state assembly is to make sure that seniors are at the top of the list when it comes to making sure that their needs are being met. And that means addressing some fundamental issues, healthcare being at the top of that list, because I don't think that you can be pro-senior unless you actually change our current healthcare system. And let me be honest, that is not going to happen if things don't change in Sacramento. We have a supermajority of Democrats in Sacramento, and yet they wouldn't even vote on changing Medicare for all. And so I challenge you to help me, if I'm elected, to organize, because it's going to take grassroots organizing throughout the state of California to be able to push these elected officials to finally do the right thing. And I challenge you to also change the way that we elect people, because until we take corporate money out of politics, we're going to continue to have this conversation 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because the corporations know that if they invest in those elected officials when they're in office, they're going to vote their pockets, not what they promised.
Thank you. Mr. Haney.
I appreciate the question. There's a couple things that I've worked on, and I would hope to build on this work as well as all of the things that we've talked about tonight and prioritize the issues of aging and disability as an assembly member. One is, when I came into office, we worked with folks who live in SROs, most of whom were either seniors or disabled. And they brought us an issue, which was that about 2,000 of them were paying really exorbitant levels of rent. We have some of our seniors who were living on SSI, who were living on fixed income, who are paying 70-80% of their very limited income to the city in rent in supportive housing. And I committed to them at the time that we were going to ensure that 30% would be the standard for every single one of our residents. I brought it to the department at the time, and they told me, well, that's going to cost us $7 million. We can't get you $7 million in 1 year. And I said, all right, well, can I get half of it this year? We fought for it, and we got it. I became budget chair, and we funded the entire thing. And now there is no one who lives in our supportive housing, overwhelmingly people who are disabled and or seniors who pay more than 30% of their rent. We put the money back in their pockets. And I think that's the kind of thing that we need to do to make sure that we are acknowledging that we can't take and put more and more barriers on people who are already struggling, that we have to understand what it takes for them to survive. I authored legislation with a number of my colleagues to bring thousands of people off the streets into shelter-in-place hotels during the pandemic. And I went and worked in one of those shelter-in-place hotels myself. The people who went into those hotels were overwhelmingly older and or disabled. That was because initially that was what it took to qualify, and I think that we saved a lot of lives because of that legislation and because of that work.
Thank you, and thank you to Meals on Wheels San Francisco for your participation and for your submission. At this time, we'd like to welcome Curry Senior Center and to the microphone. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Dave Haney with Curry Senior Center. Good to see you, David, Matt, and good luck tomorrow. So I want to take it down to kind of a fine-tuned question, and this is about CalFresh. So CalFresh is an online system, otherwise known as food stamps for those older of us, where you have to go online to order the food stamps. You need to have internet at home, a device, and skills to use such a device. How can the state bridge the gap between that helps people get access, overdose, get access to online services in their own rooms?
Mr. Haney, we'll begin with you.
Well, first of all, everyone should have access to the internet. There should be public broadband. Our state should ensure that everyone who needs access to the internet at home gets that, period. It should be funded. And so we need to address that aspect of it. But seeing that that's not the case now, what we can do is the state needs to do a much better job of enrolling people wherever they are whenever we come across them. As I said, if you're enrolling in Medi-Cal, enroll immediately in CalFresh. If you are dealing with the state in any way, and we have to be proactive about this, we should enroll you. This shouldn't be an extra step that people have to take on their own and create these additional barriers so that they have to go online themselves in order to do it. You should be able to enroll directly at stores, grocery stores. When you show up, the state should fund it so that when you go into these stores, that there's a place right there where you can enroll immediately and have it be done. These are things that I think the organizations here understand, that we really have to meet people where they are. We have to understand the barriers that exist and not erect those barriers in their way. At the same time as we understand that a barrier like someone who is a senior, someone who is low income, not having access to the internet is entirely unacceptable and is something that we can solve. And there's investments that are being made in public broadband, and all of that. But ultimately, telecom and all of that regulated by the state. If you want to sell internet in the state, you have to provide it for free to people who can't afford it. That can be something that we can do as a state. It should have been done already. So we have to address that issue, but at the same time, we have to do a better job of making sure that wherever people are, whenever they're out, whenever they interact with us as a state, that they're being enrolled in CalFresh.
In some respects, the example that you provided, I think, illustrates a point that I think is so true about state government, is that it is disconnected from the reality of what's actually happening on the ground. It's not just access to the internet. Even if you give an 80-year-old access to the internet, an 80-year-old is not going to get information on the internet. You have to actually meet them where they are and understand that there are different ways in which different people actually get information and access programs. And I'll tell you this, sometimes people think that we live in a world where race, gender, LGBT, sexual orientation, gender identity don't matter. They do matter. And one of the reasons that I'm running is because I think that you need those diverse voices in Sacramento. As a Latino man, I can tell you that if you're going to speak to Spanish monolingual people, you have to understand a little bit about their culture. Being married to an API man who has an 80-year-old, father, you're going to have to speak to them in a different way. If you are a transgender person, you're going to have to reach out to them in a different way. And that's the point about this race, is that there's nothing wrong with people, not belonging to certain ethnic groups or certain minority groups. But having representation from those groups matters. It matters when those decisions are made in Sacramento. I speak to you as someone who knows what it's like to be an immigrant, who knows what it's like to be undocumented, who knows what it's like to be a monolingual speaker, and who believes that government has to understand those experiences to actually address the needs of people. And in San Francisco, in the whole history of the city, we have never elected a Latino to the state assembly, to the state legislature. I think it's time. I think every one of our communities needs that representation because you know what? Diversity does matter, still today.
So I have a second question, and this is again for the needs of older adults here in San Francisco. Some single-room occupancy SRO hotel residents would really like to prepare their own food, but don't have appropriate facilities. It would be very expensive for the semi-industrial kitchen and SRO. So how do you help these individuals get control over their diet, their meal preparation, their culture, essentially?
I think this goes back to my overarching belief that our success as a city is defined by how those who have the least are doing. I've worked with many SRO communities throughout the city. I actually passed the first piece of legislation that require, certain protections against fires in SRO buildings. And I personally think that as expensive as it may be for them to have a kitchen, we should build kitchens in these SRO hotels. But I'll be honest with you, it's going to be challenging to do that because there are interests, real estate interests, who own these properties, who run these properties, and it's not just SROs, it's others that have a lot of power and spend a lot of money in these campaigns, hundreds of thousands of dollars in this case, against me. They are not going to do anything to support these communities unless they're forced to do so, because if they had it in their heart to do it, they would have done it by now. So we need someone who is unafraid to push them to do the right thing, even when it costs money. And I'm sorry to say this, but time and time again, the city refuses to do that. Treasure Island is the best example of that. Instead of asking the developer who got a sweetheart deal to pay for the costs that are going uncovered, they're turning around and asking the residents to pay a toll to cover those costs. We need to have a different approach, whether it's kitchens for SRO residents or other issues where we actually we get the people who have the means and who are making a lot of money to cover their fair share instead of asking those who have the least to do that, as the city continues to do that today.
Well, one of the things that we're doing a lot of, which is really important, is that the new housing that we're building, the new housing that we're acquiring, down the street from here, I was just on a call on the way over here, 200 plus units of housing, affordable housing for families, larger multi-units, have kitchens. We have to expand our portfolio of larger multi-units. This is something that I hear about all the time, is that when people go into SROs, they want step-up housing. That requires us aggressively, not only building housing, affordable housing, social housing, but we can acquire buildings, take them off the speculative market. We're doing a lot of it now. We just approved another 3 or 4 in my district, just introduced last week. And that's going to allow us to then move people out of these SROs into these larger buildings. I mean, a lot of these buildings are not built for people to live over the long terms. They're not. The units aren't big enough, and so a lot of what we have to do is move people out of those at the same time as we invest in the units that exist now. That means also that when we create standards, we have standards for group housing that we just changed at the Board of Supervisors. I've approved and supported a lot of housing that has come to District 6. One project I didn't approve was one on O'Farrell Street because it didn't have adequate kitchen space for the people who are going to live there. I think we do have to hold the line on that in terms of standing up for what is right. But also, we need to make sure that when we look at housing bonds, when we look at the investments that the state is making, that the city is making, it's not only new housing, it also has to make sure that we're renovating and modernizing housing that exists now. And I would fight for that funding to come to SROs so that we can expand kitchen space, so that we can provide for more renovation in these buildings. But there are things that we can provide for people in SROs that I'm sure you all are aware of that can allow them to prepare food better and easier and support them in doing that, even in the units they're in now.
Great. Well, thank you. Those are my questions. Thanks for your help with serving older adults, and good luck tomorrow.
Thank you for the Senior Center. At this time, we'd like to welcome SF New Deal. They have a representative here for their questions.
Hi, I'm Laura Strada. I'm one of the co-founders of SF New Deal. And I think we're splitting up the questions, so 3 different people will ask each of the questions, if that's okay. Cool, great. Well, hello, welcome. Thank you for having us. Okay, so our first question is, during the pandemic, SF New Deal supported over 200 restaurants, distributing more than $25 million and providing around, more than 3 million meals to food insecure residents here in San Francisco. I'm a small business owner, and historically, small business owners have had a hard time accessing government resources. And in this case, we used a combination of city, state, federal funds to bring food to residents and also support small business workers and owners. We're wondering what, if any, continued funding for small businesses your administration will provide, and what you'll do to make funding opportunities more accessible for small business owners.
Mr. Haney, if you'd like to begin.
Well, I think this is the kind of opportunity for a win-win that we need to be doing a lot more of, and we saw some innovative approaches to that, which you all were a huge part of during the pandemic. There were places like La Cocina, and I hope many of you have been to La Cocina, corner of Golden Gate and Hyde. We have 7 women immigrant-owned small businesses that are there that are part of an accelerator, incubator. And what we did during the pandemic is when we opened that place, when we invested millions of dollars to support them in opening it, well, of course, then they couldn't actually provide food because they couldn't open up fully. So we set up these programs where we could actually bring state and city dollars so that they could provide food and deliver food to people who needed it. Those are programs that we need to grow on, not roll back post-pandemic. As we think about the economic recovery of our state, small businesses are still struggling at the same time as people are struggling more with food insecurity. So we have to lift up both at the same time. That's going to mean that for women-owned, for immigrant-owned small businesses, for small businesses broadly, let's provide direct grant support, direct investments, tax relief, so that if you're providing those meals and resources or cheaper food, healthy food to communities or people who don't access it, that we're supporting you in doing that. I think that there are models that, like what we did with SF New Deal, that we should build on and we can build on, and I think the state should continue to support those. I've seen in my district, we were able to save a lot of small businesses that if it wasn't for the support that they got from the city and state to provide meals for the community, they would have shut their doors. That was also true in neighborhoods that were especially hard hit, like Chinatown, where the economic impact from the withdrawal of tourism was then we were able to create this lifeline with programs like this, and I think that needs to continue post-pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Campos.
Yeah, I have always been a champion for small businesses. I don't think you're going to find someone who legislatively has done more to help small businesses in San Francisco than I have. When the city passed the Twitter tax break, my response as someone who voted against it was, I don't think we need to help Twitter. I think we need to help the small mom and pop that are actually struggling, because they're the ones that are actually hiring people from the neighborhood, investing in the neighborhood. And that's how we actually came up with the Legacy Business Program. And when I approached the Chamber of Commerce that had just lobbied for the Twitter tax break, if they could help support this Legacy Business Program that could help long-time small businesses, get funding from the city, they said, we're not interested in that. We don't think that's what the city needs. So we actually went to the ballot to fund the Legacy Business Program, which has helped hundreds of small businesses, including having funding for them. I want to do the same thing at the state level. I think that we need a Marshall Plan for small businesses in the state of California, and that too much of a focus has gone to the big corporate entities that, by the way, many of them have actually made more money during the pandemic than before. And a lot of that comes from funding that they got from state and federal governments. So I think we need to do more. I want to have the legacy business created at the statewide level. I actually think that we also need to promote, especially businesses in some of these, neighborhoods where I think that they are really having a hard time. Many of them actually are monolingual speakers. So I want to be a champion at the state level for small businesses. And one of the reasons, quite frankly, that I'm not taking any corporate money is because I know why small businesses have not been the priority. But because the people who fund the campaigns of these politicians are the big corporations that expect, in turn, that they're going to prioritize their bottom line. We need to change that.
Thank you. I'd like to invite SF New Deal's next speaker. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Kate with SF New Deal. Meaningfully targeting food insecurity in San Francisco means addressing the root causes of inequity that the pandemic has only exacerbated. In the next 2 years, what meaningful progress can we expect from your administration with regards to expanding affordable housing, public transportation, and affordable health care?
Well, I think I talked about Medicare for All and why the lobby that is against Medicare for All has spent so much money against me in this campaign to support my opponent. But I also want to talk about housing. Because in many respects, I think you all have gotten the mailers funded by the realtors who have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to attack me. And why are they attacking me? Because I believe that when we build housing, that it's not enough to build simply luxury housing. That the answer to the housing crisis is to build housing that is actually affordable for middle and low-income individuals. And what the builders and developers are saying, and what the YIMBYs are saying as their spokespeople, is that it doesn't matter if you build affordable housing, that all you have to do is simply build housing, even if it's all market rate housing, because if you build enough of it, the benefits of it will trickle down to the middle class and low income. You know what? It didn't work in the 80s. It's not going to work today. If you want to build housing for middle and low income people, build housing for middle and low income people. The $2 million condo that is being built today is not something that is helping low income and middle income San Franciscans. In fact, there's a study that shows that of the housing that is being built, only 8% of San Franciscans can actually afford it. So you have a very real choice in this election. If you believe that affordable housing should be built in San Francisco, then I hope you look at this candidacy. Because there is a reason why the developers and the real estate interests have spent more than $1.5 million against me. Because they know that I'm going to push back and require that they actually build housing for regular people. Not the millionaires, but for the teacher, for the restaurant worker, because they deserve to live in San Francisco as much as anyone.
Well, there's a few things. I think you asked about healthcare, housing. I think we as a city are going to be committed to building over 80,000 units of housing in the next 8 years. It's part of our housing element, and I really recommend that people get involved with it because it's a very aggressive but necessary thing for us to do. And over half of that housing is required to be for people who are very low income, or middle income. That is a part of our mandate. And in order for that to happen, we're going to need leadership at the state level. We're going to need a massive state housing bond that will allow us to build affordable housing at a level that we haven't seen yet, and we have to make sure we have a legislator that's going to fight to make sure that that money comes to San Francisco. And we're going to have to make sure that in more of our city we can actually build affordable housing and build multi-unit housing and build apartment buildings. We're going to have to upzone some commercial corridors so that we can build more housing. And yes, when we build housing that is market rate, we have to make sure that a significant percentage of that is affordable and that we get money from that to build more affordable housing. If you go around my current district in District 6, everywhere you look, there are cranes. Many of those are for 100% affordable buildings. We're acquiring buildings. We're building new affordable housing buildings. But at the same time, it cannot happen in just one neighborhood. It has to be something that every city and county and every neighborhood is a part of. And so that's going to mean aggressive investments in affordable housing, public housing. It's going to mean changes to zoning, that sort of thing. And it's going to have to mean, and something I'm very supportive of, which is social housing. And I recommend folks who are interested in this to look that up as well. There's a new bill in Sacramento that would create a department that would allow the state to get much more in the business of housing development and creating more mixed income developments that can be more sustainable. That's something that a lot of other countries are doing that California needs to do. So these are things I'm going to lead on. I have led on here in our district, and we need our state to help our city to get it done.
Thank you. I'd like to invite last question.
Yeah, I'm Haney with SFM Deal. Thank you both for your time and answering our questions. Lastly, providing services with dignity mandates that we put power and opportunity in the hands of those closest to harm. Universal basic income allows individuals to access the services that are most relevant and needed, whether that be meals, housing, childcare, etc. What stance do both of you have on UBI, and if relevant, what measures will you take to make sure such a program widely available in San Francisco?
Oh, yeah. I'm a huge supporter of guaranteed income. It is a part of my platform, and I actually authored legislation to launch our guaranteed income task force here in San Francisco, which is issuing reports soon about what this is going to look like in San Francisco. You know, we saw during the pandemic, in a much limited way, people understood the concept of guaranteed income when the federal government sent a check that was too small two times to folks, when really what everybody understood is that there are so many people in our city, in our community, across our state and country that need that on an ongoing basis, that need to have a floor that no one can go under. And it turns out, when you look at how this is played out around the city and around cities around the country, when you give people funds directly, no strings attached, they know how to use it better for themselves more often than we know how to use it for them. They use it for food. They use it for their children. They use it to pursue additional education. And sometimes we just need to get out of the way. So now what the state is doing, there's huge investments in guaranteed income that were in this last budget by the governor and the legislature. A lot of it is in pilots that we're going to need champions in the legislature to say, we have to make that permanent. We have to expand that. We have to make sure that there are populations. For example, here in San Francisco, we've supported pilots for transgender residents, for pregnant women and moms. These are programs that we are now tracking very closely, that once the pilot phase is done, I'm going to make sure that we expand and we make permanent at the state level. These are things that I think, as we talk about healthcare and housing and all of the things that we need to do to confront inequality, guaranteed income has to be a part of that overall strategy. It can't just be one-off. It has to be a central part of our state's strategy to end poverty in California.
Thank you for that question, and I do believe in the universal basic income, and in fact, that's a big part of my platform. But I actually think that what we're doing is just sort of like we're kind of, just doing work around the edges. I think that we need to do something that is more ambitious. I actually think that there should be a guaranteed income across the board in California, and beginning with certain communities. But to be completely honest, for us to actually make that meaningful and on the scale that is needed, we're going to have to change our tax system. And that means we need to go back to the ballot box and actually change Prop 13 when it comes to what corporations are paying. We need to bring back Prop 15 because unless and until we actually make sure that corporations are paying their fair share, we're not going to have the money to actually fund a guaranteed universal income program in the level that is needed. And again, this goes back, and I know that I've said this before, but it's not going to happen unless you actually make corporations pay their fair share. And that's why, we are running the way we're running. I am running corporate free because I don't believe that you can actually force corporations to do the right thing if you are running and taking money from them. And quite frankly, California, is in some respects shooting itself in the foot by not having a guaranteed universal income, because it's more expensive not to give people the resources they need. They have to rely on government in other ways. And quite frankly, you can say that we've had a guaranteed income for corporations and big businesses in California for quite some time, because their profits in many respects have been guaranteed by the tax system that we have created to benefit them. It's time that we finally benefit the regular person.
Thank you. And thank you to SF New Deal for your questions and submissions. At this time, I'd like to welcome our friends from Visitacion Valley Community Unity for their own questions. Please introduce yourself.
Good evening. My name is Robert Cowan from Visitacion Valley Community Unity, and our question is this. Visitacion Valley is a food desert with only one grocery store. If you're elected, how will you address the lack of food access in the community? For example, will you bring a full-service grocery store to the community that's complete with a pharmacy and food that is relevant to the community?
Thank you. Absolutely, 100%. You have my commitment that I will work to do that. And in fact, I think that we need to look at other neighborhoods where that's the case. And for us in District 9, it actually took us 2 years to finally get grocery outlet to come not only to the Mission but also to the Portola. And I think that we need to do better as a city. I think the city needs to have certain requirements of these companies that if you want to come into San Francisco, that you have to be willing to come to neighborhoods that you wouldn't think about coming to. I think the state of California should have certain requirements that push for that as well. And, it's not just, the stick of requiring them to do that. I think that there are ways in which you can create incentives, for those companies to come in and move into some of these neighborhoods. But again, I think it's about commitment. And quite frankly, I think that the leverage should be at the citywide and statewide level. Because the way that it works right now is that in many respects these neighborhoods are kind of left to fend for yourselves. And there's only so much power and leverage that you have when that happens. And I think as a general rule, we as San Franciscans, believe that we're all in it together. We are the city of St. Francis. And the city of St. Francis should not leave anyone behind. And that means that the food that's available to a neighborhood should be as good in the Portola, in Visitacion Valley, as it is in Pacific Heights. That's not the approach we have today, and I think that it requires leadership at the statewide level, leadership at the citywide level, and that's where money comes in. And quite frankly, it's the bottom line. In San Francisco, arguably the wealthiest city in the country, these companies want to come in. But we should not allow them to come in into just one part of San Francisco. We should force them, if they want to do business in San Francisco, that means doing business with all San Franciscans.
Well, thank you for bringing that forward, and absolutely, I've worked with you on that, particularly on the issue of Visitacion Valley. But I agree with David that we have to ensure that no neighborhood is left on their own on this, and that there are incentives for grocery stores working directly with them at the state level, carrots and sticks to make sure that they actually open in areas where they're not right now. We need to support that. And we need to also make our own investments. Sometimes we can't rely on these big companies to do the right thing and to come into communities that they're not coming into, but we have to do it ourselves. That's part of, you look at something like La Cocina, where we opened it up in the Tenderloin. We made city and state investments in order to do that directly. Food empowerment markets, like what Jafria has talked about, some of this stuff we're going to have to do ourselves if they don't do it, and provide that healthy food, partner with the food bank, partner with the folks who are here to provide that directly. The other thing that we can do, and I mentioned this, what we're doing in the Tenderloin with the healthy corner stores. I live on Hyde and Ellis in the middle of the Tenderloin. We have 4 or 5 corner stores all around where I live. There are other communities that have similar situations as that. And what we need to do is we need to make incentives and investments so that they can provide fresh and healthy food and fruits and vegetables and pharmacies, and bring that directly to places where there are right now. It's hard in a place like the Tenderloin to actually have a huge full-service grocery store, but we can take the corner stores that we have, make those investments with them and for them, in some cases remove the alcohol, and that's a whole other issue as well, which is that a lot of these stores are surviving on things that maybe are doing some harm, but that's the only way they can survive economically, and so we have to make it possible for them to provide more healthy options and remove the others. And so it's both the full-service grocery stores, it's the public efforts, and it's also changing the what's being provided at some of the stores that exist.
Thank you to the Visitacion Valley Community Unity for your question submission. Actually, we can keep that applause going. That does conclude the questions submitted by our partner organizations. So on behalf of Project Open Hand, thank you to Music World, SFU Deal, and to BDCU for joining us and making this forum as lively a discussion as it was. At this point in time, I'm going to welcome the candidates to make a 2-minute closing statement. Mr. Campos, we'll begin with you.
Thank you again Thank you again for this opportunity. And as I noted before, this election is not just about this assembly seat. It's about who we are as a city. And there is a very clear choice in this race. Two different visions for San Francisco. I am running a corporate-free campaign because I believe that corporate and business interests, developers, have too much power today. And they're spending close to $2 million to oppose me to make sure that I'm not elected, because they know that if I'm elected, I'm going to be beholden to no one but you. I believe that it is time that we address the big issues, the inequities in our society, beginning with Medicare for all, making healthcare accessible to all San Franciscans. I believe that we need to have a recovery that is truly equitable, that recognizes that for us to do well, every Californian has to have an opportunity to do better, beginning with the small business. And by the way, the healthcare reform that I'm talking about will save every Californian $2,000. Imagine what you can do with $2,000. I also believe that if we're going to talk about building housing, that it's not enough to talk about luxury housing, that we have to build housing that is truly affordable for all San Franciscans, for all Californians. And that means someone who is unafraid to stand up to the developers to say, you know what, you want to build housing in San Francisco, you have to include affordable housing in your vision of San Francisco. Because I believe that every San Franciscan has the right and the ability should have the ability to live in this city. That walking from work to home should be something that is available to the restaurant worker, to the teacher, as it is to the millionaire. If you believe that that's the kind of San Francisco that we should have, I hope you vote for me, the corporate-free candidate in this election. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Campos. Mr. Haney, 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, again, thank you to Manning's and all of the organizations. And I know that there are many of the staff and board members who are here from the organizations. And I want to acknowledge and thank you for your leadership and your hard work. You have my commitment as the Assembly member, if I'm elected tomorrow, to work closely with you all, to listen to you, to bring you to the table, to be responsive and accountable to you. That's what I believe has been my track record as your current representative for many of you who are in my district, to be present, to fight for you, to fight for the most vulnerable in our city, to be on the front lines of the toughest problems that we're facing, of which food insecurity, the challenges of people who are aging in our city, access to health care, housing. These will be the things that I fight for, and that we have huge challenges that have gotten worse during the pandemic. People who need more, not less. We cannot retract from what we were doing during the pandemic. We have to build on it. And I agree on challenging big corporations and concentrated wealth. One of the things that I did during the pandemic was author the first ever voter-approved, and I hope that you voted for it, overpaid executive tax, which was on the ballot, which will bring over $100 million annually for us to invest in our healthcare system. I authored that, and we got it done. We can take on big organized wealth and interest and also do it in a way that is about bringing people together, that is about delivering results, that's being accountable to the most vulnerable communities like the one that I represent right now, that I've devoted my life to serving, that I live in, and we can deliver. And so I am hopeful about the future of our city and state. We have tremendous challenges, but I know there are people who know how to meet these challenges, who are doing it every single day, and you deserve and need elected officials who are responsive and accountable to you. Thank you.
Thank you both. Well, that does conclude our candidates forum for this evening. So, again, on behalf of Project Open Hand, I would love to thank all our partner organizations, Manny, Fort Point, and, of course, the two candidates for providing their time and perspective here. I'm going to turn it over to Precious Green, the Provost Manager for Manny's momentarily, but just once again, thank you all so much for attending, either virtually or in person. Please vote and get all your education needs from either the table outside or online from the designated resources. But that's all from us here. Thank you so much, and Precious, please.
Thank you.
And again, on behalf of the Manny's team, we want to say thank you, Paul and Project Open Hand and all of your partners for bringing this critical event to our space tonight. It perfectly lines up with what we try to do every day here at Manny's, which is help everyone in the community get involved in civic and political life. This was a really dynamic conversation, and Manny is pointing at me.
Did you also, I don't know if you're at the event portion of your closing,
yes.
But if any of you do want to stay, did you say that already?
No, I just
in honor of the 115th anniversary of the 1906 earthquake, we're screening a documentary about the earthquake in the front after this. So you can just spend your whole night here and watch a documentary about the 1906 earthquake right after this.
Yes. Thank you, Manny. By the way, that's Manny, for anyone wondering. So I was just asked to close and tell you all a little bit about our programming, because a lot of times we're always surprised when people are attending an event for the first time. So San Francisco has our heart, as you all know. This conversation is so important, and we have several San Francisco-specific events coming up that I want to make sure to share with you all. Of course, Manny already told you about our commemoration of the 160th anniversary of the 1906 earthquake. On Wednesday, we'll be marking 420, because if you don't, what are you doing? With a conversation on the state of cannabis here in San Francisco. On Monday, we are so excited. Jackie Spear will be joining us for what we're calling an exit interview. As you all know, she is retiring from the House, and she has got a lot to say. A lot of it, I'm sure, will be relevant to some of the points that were touched on today. So that will be Monday evening. And then on the 28th, we have the second installment of our Old School Town Hall featuring Jeff Tumlin, the director of SFMTA. And if you ever have to use Muni or ride a bus, you want to hear from him. So thank you all again for coming on out. If you have any questions about Manny's, I'm happy to talk with you afterwards, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Dropped the 50 cents. Oh, you're back, guys. The bribe is too late, sir. Thank you so much. Best of luck. What happens? I know. We got to come in early.